Moi, la question, peut-être elle peut se mettre là pour sa place. Je ne sais pas si ça vous arrange.
Justement, si toi tu ne fais que prendre le son, oui.
Oui, c'est ça, comme ça.
Voilà. Le son, on fait tous ça comme ça.
Oui, voilà.
C'est bon, Léane? Mais ouais, dans leur sens, voilà.
Je ne vois pas les deux portes en même temps.
Non, parce que sinon, là, ça cogne de ce côté-là. Les journalistes qui vont être derrière qui vont
De toute façon, une fois que vous
avoir un
avez
peu
ouvert la
mal.
porte, il ne va plus avancer.
Oui.
Vous bloquez là par les... C'est une souris.
Peut-être lui dire.
Je ferai également.
C'est bloqué?
Oui, c'est bloqué.
C'est génial.
Il y a un risque que je reste, et je ne sais pas quoi être très
Mais elle a répondu.
Ah, c'est Camille, pardon. Excuse-moi. Ah oui.
J'imagine que ça, c'est bien.
Parce qu'en fait, j'ai enregistré le numéro. J'appellerai tout le monde d'Arena.
10 minutes. On a demandé à la technique qui n'ont pas de modulette.
Je suis sur un fauteuil, enfin même pas un fauteuil, je suis à côté des fauteuils là dans mon bas.
Ouais.
Genre ça existe quand même en fait.
Derrière, il n'y a rien. Enfin, ok.
On était juste à côté quoi.
Parce qu'en plus, vous êtes descendu avec.
Je suis descendu
Oui,
avec,
il est descendu
initialement,
avec et il
j'avais
l'a
fait
posé.
sur
Ouais.
lui pour être justement avec ma frère.
Ouais.
Je suis dans l'ascenseur, etc. On s'est posé.
Bah, on est deux à avoir
Faut
demandé.
regarder les caméras de surveillance, franchement. Parce que.
Je trouve qu'il y avait du monde et tout.
Bah ouais.
On était tous là.
Oui, il m'a dit non. Ouais.
Il y avait une caméra.
On ira voir l'accueil auprès des douaniers.
La Denis a dit on ne peut pas regarder les caméras comme ça. Je sais pas, moi là, je sais quelqu'un est parti avec la veste.
Il y a ses clés, son portefeuille.
Oui, non, bien sûr, j'entends bien.
J'ai l'identité, j'ai tout quoi.
Oui, non,
Chez moi, les clés de mon scooter, je peux même pas passer ici. Enfin, c'est difficile quoi. Là, j'hallucine, ils n'ont pas mis de Bercy.
On va se descendre ici.
Non, c'est la mienne qui est.
Il a passé à l'intérieur là. Non, c'était en bas.
Duplex. Ok, d'accord, je vous dis. Ça va, on est fait à 16h pile
On va se minutes à 16h, mais.
16h. Ok.
Quand ils ont rangé le matos, l'éclairage en bas, là, ça n'a pas pu partir.
Bah, on leur a demandé justement, et non.
Ils vont pas...
Ouais, ils vont pas.
Hop.
Bonjour
Bonjour à tous, on va.
je vais dire deux mots. On sort, ouais, donc on sort, on attend M. Papin. On sort d'une réunion constructive face à une situation, vous savez, extrêmement incertaine. Au jour le jour, à l'heure, les cours évoluent sur les marchés mondiaux et on a échangé avec une profession qui est consciente de sa responsabilité face à des consommateurs à la pompe, mais aussi des consommateurs professionnels, agriculteurs, pêcheurs et autres, qui ont connu une forte hausse du prix de leur plein, qui affecte directement leur pouvoir d'achat et leur activité. On a échangé aussi sur les enjeux d'approvisionnement, la ministre y reviendra, qui sont importants aussi pour les semaines et les mois qui viennent. On a une profession responsable qui souhaite s'engager. J'imagine qu'ils auront l'occasion eux aussi de communiquer là-dessus. Ça a monté vite quand c'est monté, on l'a vu. Ça doit baisser vite si ça baisse. Et quand ça baisse, je le répète, la situation est encore très incertaine, très volatile. mais il y a une volonté réelle de faire en sorte que nos concitoyens, qu'ils soient professionnels ou privés, puissent bénéficier des baisses de prix qui, je l'espère, viendront rapidement du fait de la détente de la situation internationale.
D'abord, il convient de parler avec beaucoup de prudence, puisque on voit que la situation est extrêmement volatile, évolue de jour en jour. Notre objectif, c'est de travailler main dans la main avec l'ensemble des acteurs. Et les distributeurs, depuis le début de cette crise, ont dans leur très grande majorité joué le jeu. Et donc on compte sur eux pour continuer à jouer le jeu et à impacter, là encore, les baisses aussi vite que les hausses l'ont été. Au fond, c'est du bon sens et c'est ce que les Français sont en droit d'attendre. On a aussi évoqué la question évidemment des volumes, donc je le redis, pas de risque d'approvisionnement, des difficultés et des tensions logistiques sur des réseaux de transport, essentiellement sur le réseau de transport total, du fait du plafonnement des prix qui a massivement attiré les clients et donc créé cette espèce de goulot d'étranglement. Nous étions à environ 20% des stations sur lesquelles il y avait une difficulté sur au moins un carburant en sortie du week-end de Pâques. On est aujourd'hui à un peu plus de 10%, autour de 12 ou 13%. Et donc, voilà, la situation se détend petit à petit grâce, là encore, à tous les acteurs qui se sont mobilisés pour bien permettre à ces stations d'être réapprovisionnées. Et puis nous avons, à la demande du Premier ministre, levé les restrictions de circulation des camions. Je pense notamment aux restrictions du week-end pour leur permettre 7 jours sur 7 de réapprovisionner les stations-service. Mais je le redis, pas de problème d'approvisionnement, un problème, voilà, encore une fois, de tension au niveau des réseaux de transport.
Oui, alors je vais reprendre le mot de la ministre, prudence, parce qu'on est dans un contexte où il y a beaucoup de volatilité, le conflit est fragile dans l'espèce de paix là, qui s'est engagée, et donc voilà, il faut être prudent avec les perspectives, et surtout réactivité. Et réactivité, ça veut dire qu'au niveau des services de la DGCCRF, nous pouvons contrôler les baisses du prix que l'on vit là ces jours-ci. Ces baisses-là devraient être traduites à la pompe à partir de demain pour les stations qui ont un débit important, un tout petit peu plus tard pour les plus petites stations, vers dimanche ou lundi. Et nous nous assurons de la loyauté aussi des prix qui sont affichés à la pompe sur le site du gouvernement et sur les totems, de manière à ce qu'il y ait une transparence et que la concurrence puisse jouer. Et puis là aussi, comme vient de dire la ministre, on voit que les distributeurs, je pense, ont à cœur aussi de jouer la baisse dès que les prix vont baisser, de les répercuter. Ils se sont exprimés de ce côté-là, ils se sont engagés aussi avec le gouvernement. Donc nous, maintenant, nous allons contrôler ça. On a les moyens de le faire avec les bases de données que nous avons. Et nous regarderons avec une cartographie aussi qui est mise en place, à la fois sur les prix et aussi sur les ruptures de stations quand il y en a.
Merci beaucoup.
Attends, on vous sent moins assuré sur les baisses qu'hier. C'est parce que les cours remontent.
Vous savez,
des engagements chiffrés. On parlait de 5 à 10 centimes hier. C'est plus le cas.
Non, mais d'abord, vous l'avez dit, les marchés sont extrêmement volatiles. Le prix du pétrole sur les marchés, le prix du gasoil à Rotterdam a fortement baissé hier. Il remonte aujourd'hui. C'est normal. On attend de voir la manière dont le cessez-le-feu va se mettre en place de manière très concrète. Et les espoirs d'ouverture du détroit d'Ormuz à ce stade, évidemment, ne sont pas matérialisés. Donc on a de la volatilité, on est quand même sur des niveaux de prix aujourd'hui qui sont inférieurs à ceux qui prévalaient il y a 2 jours. Donc nous, on espère, et on a eu des engagements en ce sens, que ça puisse se retrouver sur la pompe au fur et à mesure des réapprovisionnements. Vous le savez, les cuves sont réapprovisionnées au fur et à mesure qu'elles se vident, et donc ça peut prendre quelques heures, quelques jours, le ministre Papin l'a bien dit. Moi, ce que je souhaite, ce que nous souhaitons, et les engagements que nous avons eus, c'est que quand ça baisse sur les marchés, ça baisse à la pompe. La manière et le chiffrage effectif, ça s'est vu à la hausse également, va dépendre des réseaux de distribution, va dépendre parfois aussi des capacités des petites stations, évidemment, on le sait, à réapprovisionner sur des prix parfois plus élevés. Donc tout ça va se faire, j'allais dire, au jour le jour et station par station. Mais nous, ce qu'on fait tous les jours, et c'est transparent sur le site carburant.gouv.fr, c'est les prix, ils sont connus. On va à partir de demain, mettre en ligne également les approvisionnements pour s'assurer que les stations qui sont en rupture, nos concitoyens puissent le savoir, que s'il y a une station qui n'est pas très loin, qui, elle, a du gasoil ou du diesel, qu'on puisse aller les chercher. Transparence absolue, la concurrence doit jouer en plein et la responsabilité des filières. Le gouvernement a fait sa part du travail en libérant des camions, en s'assurant que l'essence circule, en contribuant aussi diplomatiquement à tout ce qui se passe dans le monde aujourd'hui, en libérant des stocks stratégiques, à chacun de faire son boulot.
Mais une baisse de 5 à 10 centimes, ça peut sembler dérisoire pour certains consommateurs.
Non mais, il n'y a rien de dérisoire dans ces moments-là, soyons prudents.
Georgieva Meloni a demandé cet après-midi à qu'on déroge aux règles de déficit pour pouvoir faire des aides en plus, des mesures d'aide en plus. Est-ce que vous y êtes favorable?
Écoutez, moi je suis très prudent sur ces règles-là. Chaque pays fait face à ses défis. Vous le savez, on a déjà eu l'occasion de le dire, le gaz est beaucoup plus présent dans le mix énergétique italien, ce qui explique d'ailleurs que l'Italie a mis en place des mesures plus importantes également. Voilà, chaque pays a ses défis, nous y répondons avec les nôtres. Je pense qu'à ce stade, on a montré qu'on a su être ciblé, qu'on a su utiliser l'euro public avec parcimonie. Voilà, chacun ses défis, chacun ses solutions.
Et pour ces aides, on les aura quand? Les annonces des prochaines aides, même ciblées, on les aura
Écoutez, je vous demande d'être patient. On est en train, évidemment, d'évaluer la situation internationale à la minute, à l'heure, au jour. Et on adapte nos réponses à cette situation internationale. Je pense que c'est le moins qu'on doit aux Français, à la fois nos concitoyens, nos consommateurs, mais aussi nos contribuables.
Vous allez faire de nouvelles réunions avec les
I now post-war in the Middle East. The conflict has caused considerable hardship in the region and around the globe. My heart goes out to all people affected by this war and all wars. Next week, we would welcome ministers and central bank governors to our spring meetings. And our focus will be on how best to weather this latest shock and ease the pain on economies and on people. This requires understanding the nature of the shock, the channels through which it affects the economy, the size of the impact, and the policies that can mitigate it. So, what hit us? A supply shock that is large, with the world's daily oil flow cut by some 13% and its LNG flow by some 20%. It is global, with all of us now paying more for energy and with supply chains disrupted around the world. And it is asymmetric, with its impact depending on proximity to the conflict, whether you are an energy exporter or importer, and your policy space. As always, a negative supply shock pushes prices up. As a point of reference, Brent jumped from $72 per barrel on the eve of hostilities to a peak of $120. Thankfully, oil prices have fallen, but they remain much higher than before the war, and many countries are paying high premium for access to precious supplies. Spare a thought for the Pacific Island nations at the end of a long supply chain, wondering if fuel still reaches them in the wake of such severe disruption. The supply interruptions have had and will, for some time, continue to have ripple effects, such as oil refineries, disruptions because of the need to maintain minimum flow rates, with warning lights flashing in many far-flung places. Shortages of refined products, including diesel, jet fuel, they disturb transportation, trade, tourism in a world that is more interconnected than ever. Food insecurity, pushing another 45 million people in hunger, given the transport restriction problems, taking the total number of people in hunger to over 360 million, with a problem that is potentially going to get worse over time because of higher fertilizer prices. And supply chain disruptions, given industrial dependencies on sulfur, on helium, for silicon chip making and MRI imaging, and naphtha for plastics. The second question is, how can this shock play out? Through three main channels. First, the price impact and supply shortages. Higher prices for key inputs feed into many consumer goods, lifting inflation. This, coupled with shortages, reduces demand by a brute force. Second channel, inflation expectations. This can break anchor and ignite a costly inflation process. Been there, seen it. Here is the distribution of near-term inflation forecasts for the US. Notice how the curve has moved to the right, indicating higher short-run inflation expectations. And here is the curve for the euro area. It also moves to the right, and also it widens, indicating higher uncertainty. Now, there is some good news. Fortunately, long-term expectations have not budged. Very good and very important. Third channel, financial conditions. From a highly supportive starting point, they tightened in an orderly manner. Emerging market bond spreads widened substantially. Equity prices have adjusted, and the dollar appreciated. We have been here before in the 70s and earlier this decade, and we know eventually a significant part of the shock will dissipate, leaving us in a new equilibrium. Supply recovers, demand adjusts, new capacity comes on stream, energy efficiency rises. As a proof, just appreciate how the world has become progressively less energy intensive since the 80s. And that picture, what you see on the top, this cushions the shock we face today. Renewable energy increased its share, yet oil remains our #1 fuel. As the world responds, it is important that we maintain our collective quest for energy efficiency and energy diversification. Different countries have different paths to energy security, but all must strive for it. Let me move to the third question. How large is the growth impact? The answer very much depends on whether the ceasefire holds and leads to lasting peace, one, and two, how much damage the war leaves in its wake. Given the uncertainties, our World Economic Outlook, to be published next week, you can see Pierre-Olivier Gorincha here on the first row, sitting comfortably because the World work is done, it would present a range of scenarios going from a relatively swift normalization, which would be, of course, the best option, to a middle scenario, to one where oil and gas prices stay much higher for much longer and second-round effects take hold. All these scenarios start from a situation where strong AI and tech investment, supportive financial conditions, and other factors were driving considerable momentum in the world economy. In fact, had it not been for this shock, the world would have been in such a much better place than we would have been upgrading our growth projections. But now, even in our most hopeful scenario, we would have a downgrade. Why? Because of significant infrastructure damage, supply disruptions, losses of confidence, and other scaring effects. They're already baked in. Take Qatar's Ras Laffan complex, a tremendously important example of strategic investment done right. Producer of 93% of the Gulf's LNG, some 80% of it going to Asia-Pacific, a region that now endures serious fuel shortages. Ras Laffan has essentially been shut since March 2nd. It took a direct hit on March 19 and could take 3 to 5 years to restore to full capacity. Even in the best case, there will be no neat and clean return to the statu quo ante. Another relevant fact, note how ship passages through Bab el-Mandeb on the Red Sea have never quite recovered from the devastating disruptions there. They remain stuck at about half of their 2023 level. So the reality is we don't truly know what the future holds for transits through the Strait of Hormuz, or for that matter, for the full recovery of regional air traffic. What we do know is that growth will be slower, even if the new peace is durable. And we also know there are significant variations of the impact of this shock around the world, and I really want to dwell on this point. Countries able to export oil and gas undisturbed are the least affected. In contrast, countries directly disturbed by the war, including oil and gas exporters who suffered the blockade, and countries relying on imported oil and gas, bear the brunt of the impact. How bad it will be depends in no small measure on how much policy space countries have, how much buffering they can put in action. And that includes also how much they have as oil and gas reserves, given the 5-week gap we have seen in tanker traffic from the Gulf. So let me walk you through a few key charts to illustrate 3 points of differentiation. First, let's separate the world into oil importers on the left. Sorry, let me turn this way. On the left, and oil exporters on the right. As the pileup of dots on the left shows, over 80% of countries are oil importers. Second, let's highlight countries directly hit by this war. And notice how this disproportionately falls on major oil exporters, although the red dots on the left remind us of the war's toll on regional non-oil economies as well. Third, and I want us to pay attention to this, let's add a vertical scale for countries' sovereign credit rating as proxy for policy space. The bottom left quadrant is where we find vulnerable oil importers. Let's color sub-Saharan Africa in yellow and small island nations in orange. Notice how these two sets of countries largely fill that quadrant of vulnerability, and they will be very much a focus of our discussion next week. Now, given that oil is a global commodity, even oil exporters far from the affected region and enjoying terms of trade gains feel the impact of costlier oil. So this is the picture, this is where we are coming from. Let's move to the last and most important question. What should countries do? And I will start with a word of caution up front. This being a classic negative supply shock, demand adjustment is unavoidable. To put it in a non-technical language, we cannot go through it without some pain. Policymakers can help to reduce this pain in multiple ways. And certainly, one way in which they can help is, please don't make matters worse. So I appeal to all countries to reject go-it-alone actions, export controls, price controls, and so on, that can further upset global conditions. Don't pour gasoline on the fire. You need this gasoline to drive your cars. The challenge will be to detect if and when changing conditions take us from one state of the world to another. For now, there is value in waiting and watching, with central banks stressing their commitment to price stability, but otherwise staying on hold with a stronger bias to action if credibility is in question. Fiscal authorities should provide targeted and temporary support to the vulnerable, aligned with their medium-term fiscal frameworks. Next, if inflation expectations threaten to break anchor and ignite a costly inflation spiral, then central banks should step in firmly with rate hikes. Fiscal support should remain targeted and temporary. Rate hikes, of course, would further dampen growth. That's how they work, and that is the right price to pay for price stability. Finally, in a severe tightening of financial conditions, they add a negative demand shock to the supply shock, and then monetary policy returns to a delicate balancing act, while fiscal policy, if and only if there is fiscal space, switches to well-calibrated demand support. So let's see what is actually happening out there. In monetary policy, what are markets telling us? That they're expecting major central banks to tighten their policy stance. Here we see 4 key market-implied policy paths, each showing an upward shift. In energy policy, we see many countries putting in place emergency conservation measures, from general campaigns to limits on private vehicle use to remote work. These and other steps are well documented by the International Energy Agency. By the way, this is the reason we formed a partnership, the World Bank, International Energy Agency, and the fund, where we concentrate on the macro side. What this graph tells us is that in terms of economic support measures, quite a number of countries are doing the right thing. They're going with targeted measures. They are shaping to be temporary. But then we also have broad-based measures, those that are in red. And while we haven't done a detailed analysis, it does worry me that there is so much red on this slide. So let me move to looking into what is the step we need to take on the fiscal policy front. We have to avoid untargeted tax cuts. We have to avoid energy subsidies that are not well targeted. And I cannot stress enough, we have to do it recognizing how limited fiscal space we have. We will point out that measures that mute the price signal, they also mute the necessary demand response, resulting in higher global energy prices. And we will work with countries to make sure that as the situation evolves, they have the agility to correct their policy stance appropriately. So let me also look at another part of reality, what is happening on the financial front. Already the world has seen benchmark yield curves rising, driving up the cost of debt. Adding deficit finance stimulus to this mix at this moment would increase the burden on monetary policy and amplify such shifts. It would be like driving with one foot on the accelerator and the other one on the brake. Not good. As we will flag in our forthcoming fiscal monitor, the world does have a fiscal space problem. Public debt is generally much higher than 20 years ago, including in most G20 countries, reflecting widespread neglect of fiscal consolidation in the periods when conditions permitted it. As a result, interest payments are rising as a share of income, as a share of revenues at all income levels. And the implication is clear. All countries must deploy their fiscal resources responsibly, and most must move decisively to rebuilding fiscal space after this shock. And I cannot emphasize this enough. And let me say a word about financial sector policies. As our Global Financial Stability Report, Tobias Adrian is right here, would insist it is essential that financial regulators and supervisors are alert, nimble, and responsive to a fluid situation. Financial conditions have been highly accommodative for some time, spurred by tech optimism and new financial intermediaries, many of them non-banks. While this has lifted growth, it also creates risks of reversal. If investors were to start worrying about energy insecurity, holding back the growth of AI, given AI's huge energy needs, then we could find ourselves in a spot of trouble. Micro and macroprudential policies must work to reduce financial stability risks and ensure a resilient system. With that, I want to stress the most important lesson of all. Good policies make a difference. There are forces countries cannot control, but they do have authority over their own policies and institutions. Take heed, the strength and agility of your fundamentals is your best defense when shocks come. And come they will. And as you deal with the long tail of the current shock, do not forget to steer the great global transformations in technology, in demographics, in geopolitics, in trade, in climate, to build a better future. Your structural and regulatory policy choices underpin productivity and long-run growth, and growth potential matters enormously for stability. You grow more, all other things equal, you're in a better place. For us at the IMF, supporting you to build strong policies, to build strong institutions, this is our raison d'être. This is why we exist. And as the firefighter, we are here for you when a crisis hits. Once more, let's take a look at the vulnerable oil importing countries. Those that are in the left quadrant here at the bottom. We color in blue all countries with IMF-supported programs. What you notice, there are many. And we can scale up these programs if needed to be sure to help countries. And more programs will come. Given the spillovers from the war, we expect near-term demand for IMF balance of payment support to rise by somewhere between $20 and $50 billion, with the lower bound prevailing if ceasefire holds. 2 points worth noting here. One, this range would have been much higher if not for the sound policy making of many emerging market economies, including some of the largest ones over the decade. So those in the audience from emerging market economies that have built strong fundamentals, strong buffers, bravo, thank you. And two, we are well-resourced to meet this shock. So yes, our 191 member countries can count on us to support them with financing if needed. And they can count on us to bring them together to find a path forward through the fog of uncertainty. This is what next week will be about. Thank you, and let us hope for lasting peace in the Middle East and everywhere, because war takes away everything we work for. Thank you. A wave.
Yeah.
Back a little bit.
Yes.
If you go back a little bit further so we can get everyone.
Yeah.
Well, that was terrific. Thank you very much. And I was just complimenting both the graphics that went along with the speech and this amazing wall. I mean, what a terrific asset to have here to explain all of these policies. Kristalina, you've walked us through, and as you said, a lot depends on whether the ceasefire is fully implemented and how long it lasts, whether there's ultimately a solution that comes out of the Middle East. You've got these finance ministers and central bank governors arriving next week. How do you advise them about how to prepare when there's so much uncertainty about the basics that are going to drive the economic challenges that they're likely to face?
Well, the most important message we have for our members is get your house in good order. When this shock dissipates, there will be another one to come. So building strong, resilient economies, paying attention to longer-term transformational forces, investing in productivity-enhancing measures, above all, taking steps that cost no money but deliver economic results. For example, we have seen in the previous shock, we would see it in this shock, that private sector is more agile, more adaptable. One of the reasons the world economy has shown so much resilience is because of that private sector adaptability. Well, remove red tape, remove obstacles to innovation, create conditions for capital to take measured risk, and on that basis, lift up productivity. I am very mindful that this is easy to say and hard to do. This is why our teams have been working on what are structural policies that can support productivity enhancement and growth, and then on a country-by-country specific basis, work with governments for these policies to take hold. We also would be advising them work together. The world is interconnected. Yes, it is more fragmented. Yes, there are more tensions. But there is so much potential in working together within regions across the globe. And the meetings are a great way of nurturing this spirit of cooperation. And I want to thank I see in the audience many of our executive directors. I want to thank them for all the work they do to prepare their governors for that kind of inclusive discussion. So do no harm, do what costs no money, decisively, and work together.
There's a phrase that's common in this city, which is don't let a crisis go to waste. Do you think when governments have a natural tendency towards complacency, even because some of these structural reforms are quite difficult, do you think there is a sufficient sense of crisis to get them to move along this agenda?
I have seen countries taking advantage of a crisis for tremendous transformation. And I want to give a shout out to countries like Greece, Ireland, Portugal. They were in a massive crisis, Eurozone crisis. I am very grateful to our teams at the IMF for the work the IMF did with these countries. And look at them now, best performing economies in Europe. How did they do it? You buckle up, you do the tough stuff, you bring people with you. And the fact that today the president of the Eurozone is the Greek finance minister makes that point. political will, commitment, and ability to do tough reforms pays off. So more of this, less of this.
You made the point that in the context of this supply shock, we're likely to see price increases. We could see a breakout of inflation, pushing central banks to raise rates precisely at the time that their fiscal authorities are going to be trying to ensure that there isn't a collapse of demand and slipping into a recession. How do you advise, again, these countries on the prioritization, the sequencing, and ensuring that they don't, as you say, put one foot on the gas and one foot at the brake at the same time?
What is very important to recognize is that different from COVID, when all countries were in the same boat, we had demand and supply collapsing simultaneously, and governments, monetary authorities, fiscal authorities, they had to do all the same thing: monetary policy accommodation, fiscal policy accommodation. And they had fiscal space, many of them. They had policy space to do it. Now it's different. Now different countries are in a different place in terms of inflation. You look at Asia, for example, many countries in Asia have not been experiencing inflationary pressures. They may see some of it, but they're in a different place. And then you go to countries where inflation has not yet been defeated from the previous round. So very important for monetary policy to be calibrated to country-specific circumstances. Fiscal policy, unfortunately, we have a fiscal space problem, almost universally. We have seen debt levels going up, with interest rates higher. I showed that on the screen. It is eating from government budgets a bigger and bigger chunk. So fiscal policy absolutely everywhere has to be very careful not to put in place unaffordable measures. And this is why I was showing you the red on this screen. I am proud of the countries that had the bravery to really focus on targeted and temporary measures. And I think, unfortunately, here there is no easy way around. What should countries also think of? How can they lift up their growth potential? Because the problem of high debt can only be melted away with high growth. And high growth would only come with high productivity. You look at the United States, where productivity has been growing robustly, and growth has been quite strong. Comes this shock, it is not as dramatic for the US economy. I think that there is a lot to be learned from the US in terms of creating innovation environment, in terms of deep capital markets and risk-taking attitude. I also think that in the US now with the deregulation there would be more woof in the economy, but be careful, don't deregulate to a point in which from asset that turns into a liability.
So are you in that camp that believes that the AI-induced potential productivity increases is going to save us from all of our other economic problems?
I am absolutely in the camp that believes that AI brings tremendous productivity enhancement potential. Our staff has done an analysis, and it says gain in productivity can be between 0.1%, 0.8%, actually productivity turning into growth impact. 0.8 is
significant,
massive. Even if we are at midpoint 0.4, this would lift global growth above the pre-pandemic trajectory. Now, could be even more. But We also at the fund are mindful of the risks for labor dislocation and labor market disruptance. We actually see in advanced economies 60% of jobs being affected by AI over the next years. This is like a tsunami hitting the labor market. And the issue is, many of these jobs would be enhanced. They would be more productive, but there would be jobs that would be also eliminated. And we need to think hard and then work with private sector. How do we steer this process more consciously? And here is my problem. There are so many topics that hit us. I mean, I think that the world has developed a attention deficit disorder, that we can't really stay on one hugely important issue, which is how to gather the benefits of AI and mitigate the risks consistently.
You know,
let me ask the audience, how many of you are optimists about AI? How many of you are pessimists about AI? So here we go. The audience is with us. Thank you.
You know, the IMF, indeed the whole Bretton Woods system, in many respects, was built on the supposition about the benefits of interdependence. And in that, we look back over the last several years, we've seen the weaponization of interdependence, whether it's the financial system, supply chains, or now with the Strait of Hormuz, the weaponization of geography. What lessons do you think countries might take from these developments about their approach going forward? Are they likely to be more autarkic? Are they likely to pull back from interdependence? And what does that mean for global growth?
Well, the world has changed quite significantly, and we have to recognize that the depth and breadth of this change. And then lean forward into the world of today and tomorrow rather than trying to somehow hang to the world of yesterday. And one of the big changes is it is a world of multiple centers of gravity, different alliances. Some of these alliances are more stable, some are less stable, some are economic, some are geopolitical. And that makes it more complicated for countries to figure out how to go about their dependency on relations with others. But let me say two principles are in play. The first principle is we are interconnected. So the one thing that is not possible is to pull yourself out of any interdependence and say, I'm going to do it all on my own. Even the largest economies cannot do that. And of course, if you're a smaller, open economy, it's absolutely not possible. So you have to work on interdependence aspects. And the second one is be objective in answering not only the question, what is in for me, but also the question, what is in for the other guy? And then recognize that there has to be expanded value proposition for everybody. If it is something in which one gains and the other one loses, I guarantee you it's not going to last very long. And this is where international organizations have a responsibility to objectively map out strategic advantages, disadvantages, and then help our membership to find pathways of mutually beneficial engagements. How do we do that? By being candid, by being honest in our analysis, not pretend that a problem doesn't exist, and then accept that sometimes some of our members, when we present this analysis, they may be a bit kind of rattled by it, and find a way to communicate the outcome of analysis in a way that countries would accept it. And that is very important for us to recognize that not always it is about being right. It is also about being measured and timing engagement, doing it in a way that is respectful of others. So a lot to learn. Everybody has to learn to live in this new world, and IMF is no exception. And I'll tell you, we have wonderful people at the fund that are on this learning journey every day. And what do we bring? Transmission line of knowledge. We learn from different countries, we pass this knowledge around.
And with these changes that you were talking about, including disruption of the global trading system, greater fragmentation, how has the approach or the theory of the case for the IMF changed? Has it evolved over the last 10 or 15 years in terms of the kinds of advice it's giving countries?
So, yes, of course, the world changes, the IMF changes as well. I would say the two very significant systemic changes I have seen in my time, and I have seen it in when Christine Lagarde was here being undertaken, are one, recognizing that the acceptability of reforms, the political economy of reforms matters, and that we need to understand how are policy measures affecting people, that ultimately all we do is for people. And that element of empathy, sometimes reforms are very painful, understanding that, and then thinking of mitigating factors to increase the acceptability of reforms, to improve engagement within society. And I see that really changed. I see it time and again when I engage with our members. And the second big change that has happened for the fund is that we now see that our headquarter base and our in-field presence, they need to work holistically. We are mostly headquarter-based institution. We have about 4,000 staff, 3,000 are here, 1,000 out in the field. But how we work with our training institutes, how we work with our regional offices, with our local presence, so we have that constant transmission of knowledge up and down that makes our ability to help countries more durable. I think also the fund has proven that we are indispensable in a world of frequent shocks. There is no other institution that can, as the fund, step in forcefully, protect our members, and protect not only for the benefit of the individual member, but also because of the spillover risks, because trouble travels. If one part of the world is disturbed and vulnerable, that vulnerability affects others. And that I can say from the bottom of my heart, I'm so grateful to each and every one of the staff of the fund for what we do, to be that anchor of stability in a world that has more trouble.
Terrific.
So to the staff of the fund in the audience, bravo and thank you.
Terrific. We'll take a few questions from the audience. Let me first, I see Heidi Kriba-Redeker, and a microphone is on its way.
First of all, thank you so much, Managing Director and Mike. So in President Trump's FY26 budget, he called on Congress to approve the General Review Owed quota for the 16th review. So this is something that would double the quota for the IMF, and it would keep the U.S. veto. Is this something that I think, do you have confidence that this will, that Congress will act in a timely fashion given all of the challenges you just outlined? And if not, what are the consequences for your firepower and your ability to deal with that lower quadrant that you just referred to? Thank you.
Let me express my heartfelt gratitude to the administration for putting the 16th quarter review for approval with Congress, and to everybody who has worked on that in U.S. Treasury, but also on the Hill. We have had many engagements to make sure that people understand why this is a good thing for the world and for the United States. I found in my visits on the Hill that, for example, not everybody understood the financial model of the fund. We are like a savings bank. We have pledges of money, let's call them deposits of our members. We lend, and then we pay back with interest. We are not like other institutions that need congressional appropriation. Last 2 years, we paid the US $3.1 billion in interest on the money we generously the US allowed us to lend. So that, I think, is the simple answer. Is this a burden for the US? But then comes the benefit. And of course, it is a high benefit for the US to have the IMF surveying all countries, providing to everybody from one point of entry a picture of the economic health of the world and each region and each country. And then, of course, to come as a rescuer, very often to economies that are significant, including for the US. So I'm fairly optimistic that given the value we offer, that would lead to approval, and we would make every effort to show and answer questions related to the appropriation. To answer your question, would it happen in a timely manner? It is in the budget, so we will work to get it to happen. But to give comfort to the audience, we have firing power. We need that. We need this increase. Why we need it? Because we simply don't know what the future may bring. And the fund is not an institution that you want to drive to lending to the last penny. No, you want the fund to stand firm. Crisis comes and we say, hey, crisis, you think you scare me? You don't. We have big cushion for you. Because of what I said about emerging market economies strengthening their positions, we are not seeing big countries. I think of great economies like Brazil, India. They don't need borrowing from the fund, but they also need the surveillance of the fund. Tell me what is happening everywhere. And they need us to stabilize their neighborhood. From that perspective, one, it is not like we run out of money, but we want to be so strong that the crisis comes, looks at us, puts its tails between its legs and goes away. Scary. But at the same time, I recognize that the 16th quarter review is not only about money, it is the symbol of the fund being supported by all its members.
Great. Dan Poneman.
Thank you for that outstanding presentation. Thank you, Mike. You talked a lot about the energy shock, but still the importance of maintaining the diversification and efficiency and to avoid untargeted subsidies. Mm-hmm. So what advice would you give to the central banks who are trying to thread that needle, given that they're being affected differently, unlike the COVID crisis, and avoiding these go-it-alone strategies that you are concerned about?
Well, the most important thing for central banks is to be attentive to data. Right now, and if the ceasefire holds, if it is a more short-lived disruption, it may very well be that central banks can sustain this watchful position, and the only way we would see impact is through slightly higher inflation that de facto means interest rates are lower. You know, when inflation goes up, interest rates may stay the same, but this is a little bit of easing. Now, if this situation changes, central banks have to be prepared to tighten. And that is something that is really important to recognize. They cannot afford to let inflation spiral out of control. There is a bit of a risk that central banks, having waited a bit too long during the previous inflationary episode, when they were not as fast, some of them not as fast as necessary, that they may feel compelled to urge, to rush into tightening rates. So we are telling them, don't do that either. You know, be watchful, concentrate on conditions, because if you tighten prematurely and unnecessarily, you're throwing cold water on growth. And then the demand may shrink, and then from a supply shock, you get into supply and demand shock, and it may get ugly. I walked you through the three scenarios: short-lived disruption, disruption that goes into inflation going up, and one that becomes expectations, long-term expectations being unanchored. The attentiveness to where you are, the clarity of assessing data is hugely important, and our teams would be doing also, from our side, very careful analysis of where we are. What we do depends on where we are. Okay. But I can tell you, it's not an easy thing to be a central banker these days. Why? Because for them, it's either bad or very bad. There is, at this moment of time, they're in a tough spot. So send them a little bit of love. We love you. You're great.
This is
your job.
The kinder, gentler IMF. We're sending love. Guillermo Christensen.
Thank you, Mike. I got to say, I think you have a second career as a TED Talk presenter based on your, Guillermo Christensen, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and also a partner at K&L Gates, a global law firm. And my work is a little bit like being a fire station. I put out fires, but I'm not an arsonist. So when you talk about geopolitical risk and disruption, I may be one of the few people here who sees the upside on that generally, which is why I was struck at Davos, and I think you hinted at this here, these geopolitical disruptions and risks are not all down, right? There are some interesting dynamics and elements. The disruptions in blocks create new blocks and things like that. I'd love to hear that positive message, because when I talk to boards and CEOs, they are all very pessimistic about this. In fact, they're just fatigued about the geopolitical risks. So, thank you.
I'm so glad you asked this question, because indeed what we are seeing is when there is that reshaping of relations, new opportunities come. For example, take ASEAN. Trade within ASEAN is around 20%. In comparison, trade within the EU is 60%. So why are these countries not trading more with each other? And that is something that they're reflecting on. And we would like to help them to build not only more vibrant trade relations, but also to think about their collective strength and put it in place. Same applies to the Gulf. Countries in the Gulf actually have been working robustly on coordinating their reforms, improving their interconnectivity until this war affected them, but I'm sure this would be a longer-term trend in the Gulf. When you look at the continent of Africa, there is so much. If you take problems as opportunity, many of those, that comes with improving regional trade, regional integration. You take another angle, non-tariff barriers. The world is so rich of this obstacle to growth and development that just concentrating on robust action to eliminate non-tariff barriers in regions and do that systematically, big uplift. So, and even the EU is an existing entity. You look at their internal market, not completed. If they were to complete the single market, if they were to have, and I'm now more optimistic they will, and by the way, it is happening because of these shocks. They might have been more complacent otherwise. They have a capital markets union, that's great for the EU. It's also very good positive spillover effects for the rest of the world. And I think people like you, we probably should create the club of optimists. We need to recognize that a changing world is also a world in which unthinkable opportunities are presenting themselves, not only challenges. Yes, we have to care about the challenges as well, but hey, seek opportunities, grab them.
Kristalina, we wish you and the IMF staff the best of luck next week with a very important set of discussions and are very grateful to you for sharing your perspective on the global outlook. Please join me in thanking the Managing Director.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Many thanks to the audience.
That's great.
Thank you. Thank you.